Welcome, K-Rahn Vallatine, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I have you on as a training consultant, and that is going to be in lines with education, helping people understand more about themselves, about their business. There's just so much when we get into the world of consulting, and we're going to be looking at your history and your work and just telling the world what you do and how you help. In your own words, can you do that for us? Give us a little bit of history, why you became a training consultant, and then maybe even say, what is a training consultant?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with what I do as far as what is a training consultant. I work with a lot of organizations, agencies, school districts, nonprofits, even corporate, really just assessing their training needs. Because a lot of times we come into professions with a passion for it or with a heart for it. So let's say, because I do a lot of work with community. A lot of people come into the work to want to work with youth or reentry populations. They have a heart for it. But just because we have a heart for it don't mean we always have the right skill set. Same thing with teachers and all kinds of different professionals. So I tend to fill in the gaps. I assess the training needs of the staff and then develop professional developments accordingly. Anything from, again, youth engagement, implicit bias, diversity, equity, inclusion, de-escalation strategies, how to have healthy conversations, all of these type of things. And the way that I got into this, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Everything has been organic. I tend to assess the needs of what's going on around me, and I tend to fill in the gaps. So usually when I do something, whether it be because I'm also an author and I'm also a curriculum developer, I don't try to create things that are going to compete with what's already out there. I look for those gaps, and I tend to have an eye for the gaps. I say, oh, okay, they have this training. Like I do a lot of training on trauma. So I do a lot of trauma-informed training. But there's a lot of that out there, but there's not a lot of that out there for practitioners, if that makes sense. So you may have somebody who has this PowerPoint and has all this theory, which is great. No disrespect to that. But I come as a practitioner who have been doing the work for years and then put the spin on trauma-informed approaches with direct, practical experience and examples. And people tend to love that because they say, I've never had these type of experiences before in a training. And that's the type of stuff that I do. I make sure that everything I do is very practical.
I remember in the movie The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, he basically bought this machine. He thought it was going to be like the new revolution. It's like an X-ray machine. It can check bone density, I believe, is what the machine could do. And he bought a bunch of these machines, and this is going to be like the new greatest thing, right? And he would go to all the doctor's offices and he would say, this is going to be the best machine ever. And doctors were like, it's just marginally better than what we have already. But even though it's a little bit better, we are filling in that gap, right? Because if we can be more accurate, especially when it comes to health, if I go to the doctor or the hospital, I want the best x-ray, all right? I don't want something that's fractionally good. So when we can find those holes, be it so much in a system, in education, in our life, what does that do to people when we start to talk about things that maybe they didn't really put much light to?
What it is transformative. So what you find is, at least in my experience, it's not just information. It's not like, oh, that was a good, let me look at my notes. That was some great points he made. You find that a lot of people, their perspective changes. And that's where the real magic happens. Again, when it's one thing, if I just give you some, it's almost like magic. When I was a kid, I used to love magicians and stuff like that. And it's one thing to get a magic book where it teaches you how to quarter out the ear. And you're sitting there like, okay, so I'm supposed to do. It's not going to flow. It's an art of. And that's what I really work on when we're dealing with what they call human interaction management and all of this type of stuff, the art, not the how-to, but the art. Because I can give you these points, but if I can help shift your perspective and transform your perspective, that's when the art happens. That's what I really tend to do with a lot of the work that I put out there.
And I love the way you put it, because some people think I'm going to give you a bunch of data. I'm going to read a bunch of PowerPoints to you. I'm going to give you some pamphlets, you read it. And then all of a sudden, everything's going to be better. If trauma is what you're lacking in your business or in your district, like, we're going to give you all the information, but it doesn't mean you're going to apply it. Giving them the practical steps that they can take, giving them real life examples. And it's going to be different for every business I'm sure you step into, because if you go into a mom and pop shop, their mentality is going to be different than if you go into a middle school and you're just working with the middle school teachers. When we look at developing courses for different entities, what is the most difficult part you find when working with people?
When it comes to developing courses and things of that nature, the most difficult part is my process. And my process is I'm a part of the community first. So that's why things take time. So for instance, let me create a course for, let's just use podcasters. I'm going to create a course for podcasters. I don't have a podcast. Yeah, I could do that because I have the skill set to put it together. I don't have a podcast. I'm the opposite. I'm gonna be amongst the podcasts. If I want to do, I'm gonna be amongst the podcasts. I'm going to the conferences. I'm showing up to podcasts. I'm a part of the podcast community. And once I'm a part of the community, I start to assess the needs versus let me try to pitch you something. Let me try to sell you something. It's like, who are you, right? But if I'm amongst the community and you know, K-Rahn has been amongst the podcast community for years. Oh, he knows what he's talking about. Then there's some buy-ins. Typically with everything that I do, the challenge is the process, which is the time, because that's where my stuff comes from. And what I find is, I don't know if you're familiar with ethos, logos, and pathos. Have you ever heard of those concepts?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Are typically influenced by really all three, but we're usually lean to one more than the other. So you got ethos, which is credibility, pathos was the emotion, and logos, which is the logic. And the key is to balance all three. I'm an ethos person. So if I came on here, or if I was listening, somebody came into my room saying, okay, I'm gonna teach you how to make $1 million. Have you made $1 million, right? That's ethos, that's credibility. A lot of people are more swayed by pathos, which is the emotion. If I come in, I'm gonna show you how to make $1 million. Who's ready to make $1 million? You know what I'm saying? I get you all fired up. That's the emotional piece. A lot of people are swayed by that. I'm not so much. But then you have people who are more logos, the data. Yeah, K-Rahn, I heard that you've made $1 million. That's great. I love your passion. That's great. But let me see the data. Let me see the plan. Let me see people are motivated by that. When I tend to create anything, I keep all of these in mind. So like I say, I'm a practitioner. Most of the stuff that pretty much everything that I create comes from a real place. That's the ethos. But I still got to know how to present it in a way where people can receive it, which is the pathos. And I have to have the data. I have to be able to bring that into. I can't just say, this is my experience, and let me tell you, I have to be able to bring the data. So I keep all three in mind. And that's another part of challenge, to make sure that I'm properly balancing it, especially based on my audience.
Yeah, there has to be that there. When I look at the pathos part, I think of like Tony Robbins. He comes in these big events and he's like, who's ready to change their life? And a lot of people are ready to change their lives. Every single day, they want to make some changes. They want to be in a better situation or circumstance, but they have a hard time getting over one of those three that we just spoke about, because they're just thinking like, well, this person that's coming to me, do they have the credibility, right? Do they have the enthusiasm? Can I see the data? We get in our way quite often when we're trying to enhance ourselves, because it doesn't mean like every speaker that comes in front of you, you should just say, okay, I'm going to give like 100% of my divided attention, especially in our world today. We have so many smartphones and technology and so many distractions. You can go on stage, you can present something, but if someone is not there, can you still have an impact on the people who are just checked out?
Absolutely. That's where human connection comes in. See, sometimes people are committed to their presentation that they forget that there's real people out there, right? That's where I have to adjust. Okay. And you know what else? Especially because of the work that I do, I'd say a lot of community work. You find there's a lot of people who have dealt with a lot of trauma and are skeptical about a lot of stuff. I can be doing the training. This happens a lot, especially when I'm working with the reentry population, people that's come home from prison, stuff like that. They will sit like this the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give me nothing. Then at the end of the presentation, they say, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, all this enthusiasm comes out. They say, that was the greatest presentation I ever heard. And I'm like, why didn't you give me that energy during the presentation? So I've learned to be able to read the room, but not take it too personal. Like if you're not getting the reaction that you feel you're supposed to have, because everybody doesn't wear their feelings like that. They'll know that, okay, what I'm sharing, there's value in this. Okay. And still be flexible and things of that nature. So it's a balance even with that.
I mean, I was a teacher for many years, and it's a huge swing from children and adults. Children are just happy. You can tell they're having a good time. You're like, all right, I'm doing the right thing. For adults, it's just like, I don't know. So you're just working through, you get better as you progress. Of course, the first one might not be the best, but then you learn from your mistakes, especially if you're getting critique from other people. And I think that's where you fill in the gaps too, because you become a better presenter, you become a better consultant, content creator. And that is important because what we do is we fill in the holes of people's lives. I do mindset work, and what you do is very akin to that, where it's like you help people understand, like, all right, we need to look at this because this is important. And when you do that, people start to give a little bit of awareness to the situation. And I think sometimes some of our biggest issues in our community and our own personal lives is because we don't apply awareness to it. I think a critical part of your job is to applying awareness to different aspects of someone's business, someone's life. And then they're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Even if it wasn't an emotional swing or a data swing, it's just an eye-opening swing because most people are thinking in their own logic, their own path, right? I have been taught this. This is what I know best. This works for me. When someone comes in, gives a little bit of teaching, training, whatever. This happened a lot when I was a teacher. People would come in who were never teachers, and they would say, okay, if you want your kids to behave, you have to do this. And then all the teachers are like, but that doesn't work because they have lived it, right? And it's important to understand that having that experience is a good thing, but then also coming from a place on the outside can offer some reflection. It's almost akin to seeing your blind spots, right? When you're working with big companies now, let's look at the big companies. They're so focused on the marketing plan. They're focused on so many different things. You come in, you see a bunch of blind spots, you see a bunch of holes that you can fill in. How do you present that to them so they say, you know what, I didn't think of that?
Wow, that's a good question. So what I do first is find out what their objective is. Like when we're dealing with trainings and things of this nature, I don't go in and say, okay, let's just do this training. I say, okay, what do you want out of, bringing me in? What is your objective? So now we can have, because if I don't do that, I could think this training went great. I got people happy, they excited, they loving it. But then the person who brought me in could say, no, you totally missed the mark because I wanted this to come out of it. First, make sure that we assess what do you want? What does winning look like? And then based on that, start to assess, okay, what's going on in this company? What's going on with the staff? What are some of the challenges? And then bringing those challenges to the decision makers based on what they said they want. So if you say you want to raise the morale in your team, let's look at certain things that may be hindering your morale. Are you checking in with your staff? Are you having these one-on-ones? Are you just is it business as usual, or are you really checking in? Do you have an open door policy? People feel safe. Do they even feel safe? Because you may say, yeah, I have an open door policy. What's your culture in there? Do people feel safe enough to be honest? So we assess things like that. And if they don't, then we need to talk about that. What's your change management strategy? Because that's another thing that brings morale low. Where are you just constantly rolling out something new? Like, one day we're doing this, the next day you're like, no, we're doing it this way. And now with nobody, like everybody's now frustrated, like, because in the decision-making side of things, a lot of times you don't think about that. You like, this is just what needs to be done. And you know why you're changing the policy. You know why, and it's great for the company, but your staff doesn't know why. You haven't given them the proper rollout, the proper preparation to what I tend to do, going back to what we were saying, I tend to look what's your objective? And then we start to look at those things that may be hindering that. It's not a personal attack. It's not, you're not a good leader. Or no, it's like, okay, based on what you want, these are some of the challenges that are hindering that outcome. And I tend to do it like that.
And I think what you create is almost an immense transparency. Like, hey, this is clear now, right? So you're telling everyone, so you're getting the boss on the same page as the employees on the same page as the boss. Everyone's under one roof. Everyone has one mission, one goal, one objective. And when that happens, right, we become more, I want to say unionized, but it's not like, just like
autonomy.
Yeah, like we collaborate together so much more beautifully. And I think that's what a lot of companies and a lot of entities are missing, especially schools, is that everyone works by themselves. They have the different departments at school. The accounting probably never talks to the people in maintenance. Like, unless something's broken, it's just like, okay, so where is that family type of interaction? And I think some people, when they go to work, they want to have that because A lot of people today, especially today, they want to start their own thing. They want to be their own entrepreneurs, their own bosses. But there comes some truth to saying, you know what? I want to support someone else's dream, and I'm going to get compensated for doing that. So let's say you had a company, and it was a company I can get behind. I just love everything about it. Google is a great example. I love what Google's doing, and I want to be a part of that. But Google, they spend millions of dollars in personal development for their staff and consulting training because they understand that Google is just like, I want to do this. I want to do this. But when we can bring someone in and say, okay, what's your objective? Right. That right there just defines like, okay, let's present this to the staff. And then they get feedback from the staff, and people love working there, not only just because of the free snacks and like the nap pods, but because they are listening to them too. They're helping someone build their dream, but then their voice is not muffled. And I find that in a lot of companies and a lot of districts, especially schools, the teachers are muffled, the employees are muffled, and it's just the top echelon. It's like, this is what we're going to do. Do you find that to be common, or maybe just kind of a here and there thing?
No, it's very common. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Like, so for instance, when I do trauma informed approaches, and I do trainings on trauma and trauma informed approaches to engagement, you find like trauma informed approaches is not a checklist, it's a perspective, right? And reason I share that, and to your point, is you will find a lot of agencies will say, okay, let me send my direct staff in. Let's just say it's a school district. Let me send my teachers in because they need this because they're working with the kids. All right, that's great, but that's micro. To really have a trauma-informed approach, it has to be a cultural shift, which means I also need administration in. Because, what happens when this teacher has this trauma-informed approach and is engaging the student, but then the student has to go to the administration who doesn't have the same approach and totally unravels it, right? Or the administration doesn't have a trauma-informed approach with the teacher or their colleague. So you find that a lot of times we tend to do that, and we tend to be in these silos, and we say, you need it, but then you don't need it. So it still doesn't create the culture that's needed, right? And I also wanted to speak and highlight on what you said about that entrepreneur thing. Because right now, many people are in a stage where everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur, and a lot of times I just don't want to work for nobody. That's not the same thing as entrepreneur. Just because I can cut hair doesn't mean I need to open my own barbershop. Great at cutting hair, but entrepreneur, it comes with a lot. Can you really handle the feast and famine stages where one time you up, this month you got money, next month, and there's a lot of stuff. Can you really handle the networking and the marketing and wearing all the different hats? All that stuff comes with entrepreneurship. So I like what you said about maybe I can use my skill set to support somebody else. Because right now, I just literally just got off working with incarcerated young men out in Baltimore. I did a virtual thing.
Okay.
And we were talking about success, and I was sharing with them, a lot of people, you hear about people being dependent. So they're dependent on somebody else for their success. That's not a good look because you're dependent. But then people say, okay, I'm going to be independent. I'm going to do it all by myself. I got this. Yeah, that may help a little bit with your ego. And it may get you off to a good start, but you're going to find that you're going to end up running into a wall somewhere. The key to success is interdependent, where I bring something to the table, you bring something to the table. Nobody is truly just fully self-made. I know it sounds good in a rap song, but no, we're not all self-made. I need you, you need me. Like we're interdependent. And those who learn the skill of how to be interdependent, okay, I need you, but I'm going to also make sure I bring value. Those who do that tend to be successful. I don't necessarily have to always start my own or have my own. I just have to understand the art of interdependency. And hopefully the people I work with understand the same thing. And that's how we make the magic.
Great point. Our society, as we've been talking about, is the Lone Ranger, the lone wolf, the solo player, whatever you want to consider them. They fight the world by themselves, and they don't really look for community, interdependence, or working as a group. It's difficult to change someone who has been doing something for so long and it's been working for them. I'm going to focus on my career. Okay. You focus on your career, but maybe you still want to, start a family or something, right? Oh, I can't start a family yet, because I'm working on myself. Work on yourself. And that creates that mindset, is what you were just saying. Go to do this myself. All right. But I know very true, I can't do this by myself. When you want to create something as big as what I want to create, there's no way I can do it by myself. I have to figure out who I can bring to the table, who's going to help me with my dream, with my mission, and then is also in line with what they want to accomplish so they can feel fulfilled at the end of the day. Because there is a correlation to happy workers are going to be more effective and efficient. You just can't expect someone you give a paycheck to. And this is something I had to learn. I would give someone a paycheck, salary, and give them raises. And I'm thinking they're going to do a great job for me, right? I'm paying them all this money, but they didn't have the passion. They didn't have the same drive that I had. This is my business. It's not their business. But yet there is a way that you can get people on board with the mission and the purpose that you're trying to bring to the world. It's not an easy task. What would be your first step to get people more united in the sense of together we can thrive?
First of all, to your point, in our society, we have been indoctrinated to do things by ourselves. Like if you look in schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, I study by myself. I cover my paper. I take the test. Don't cheat off me. It's all me, already in our head. With that being said, some of the things that I do and I suggest, and I say this constantly to people, is you have to really look, especially if you're the leader, you have to really look at your team and see who you're dealing with, and then assess what people value and pay people what they value. Okay. So now, first of all, we know people come for a paycheck. So that's a part of it. So you definitely want to pay them money because that's what they're here. One of the reasons that they're here for. But then you find that people value certain things. Certain people, if you give them an employee of the month certificate, oh my gosh, they're going through the roof for you because they value that validation. Somebody else doesn't care about that. Somebody else like, what am I gonna do with the certificate? They looking at the other person like, what do you know? Because they value something different. They want a gift card. Somebody else don't want a gift card or a certificate. They will value if you say, you know what, you've been doing so great. Just take the day off today. It's paid. Don't worry about it. They value that. You have to really assess what your team values and compensate them with what they value. But that takes more time. You tell somebody, just go home early. I know you've been working hard. Don't worry about it. That person who values that, you got them for the next 3 months going, 110%. I mean, I don't have to keep giving examples, but that's what I would say. But that takes more time because it's easier just to say, here's a paycheck, here's this, a raise, but we have to take the time to look at what people value and compensate. Some people like attention. That's another thing. And I say this, we're constantly assessing people and judging people and saying, why do they want that? It don't matter why they want that. I don't know. Maybe they childhood, they lack something, they need some validation. I don't know, but it's okay. Somebody else, like me, even though I because of the work I do, I am in front of the camera. That's not really my thing. If let's say me and you was working together, you may be the camera guy. You may be the guy that loved the interviews, loved to jump in front of the camera and talk about the company. Go ahead. Somebody else is going to say, why he always in front of the camera? Because that's what he values. Give it to him. I say give it to him, long as it's not hindering the company, long as he's not up there making the company look bad. He's not lying. If that's what he's not pushing anybody out the way to get in front of the camera. There's nothing that's going to damage our morale. If that's what that person values, give it to them, and I think that's a big piece of it. Like we have to realize that just what I value, you may not value, and what you value, I may not value. I just have to be respectful of it and be aware. And as the leader, do my best to give it to you.
And a lot of business books, actually, like that concept, that notion is like, I have a business partner and the business partner might not seem like they're doing a lot of things, but behind the door or like behind the curtains, like they're doing a lot. And so even though you can only see maybe one or two things that they do, they actually are like the glue for keeping everything together. Sometimes you can even correlate this to a marriage where it's like you might see one person making all the money and then one person staying at home. And you might think like, okay, like this person who stays at home is doing nothing, but that's not true. That person is cooking the meals for the person. That person is cleaning the clothes, making sure the house is tidy and peaceful when they come home so they can go fight the world the next day and they can feel energized. It's difficult when people just see, this is what I value. I value making money. I value being in front of the camera. And then you look at the other person and then they're just sitting on the sofa or something. But yet they do so much too. We do have to see that. And I think that's where your work shines, because you help people see that when, beyond what is just you. Because if I'm focused on results and I have an employee who loves to get raises, and I'm giving everyone raises, that one employee is doing a great job, but everyone else is suffering. Maybe everyone else just wants me to say, you know what, a little bit of validation, as you said, you're doing a great job. And then when you can bring it into a company, bring it into a place, and not just talk about what they're missing, like trauma, success, leadership, whatever you're going to be working with them as your objective that day, you're also bringing them closer together. And I think that is where the power comes in, because if we are going to be an entity, it's better to be in unison and work together to get the job done. They say, it's an old adage, I talk about it a lot. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so what you do is you bring people together, you bring organizations together. And I think that is what our world needs. It's not just our community, our world needs that. And when we can start to apply that, everything starts to change. As we begin to wrap up, I would love to get some final words from you, and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you.
Well, to your point, the key is, if we're talking last words, if you have an organization or you have a business or anything, I would highly encourage you to assess the culture. A lot of times we look at individuals and things of that nature, but it's the culture. You know, you mentioned Google. They created a culture that breeds success. Make sure you're evaluating your culture. You can reach me. I mean, my website is Inner Sun Consulting. That's Sun, SUN, INNERSUN, consulting.com. I'm getting better on being on social media. I'm a little from a different generation, so I'm getting better with it. I'm on Instagram at Live Above It. And that's pretty much it. I would love to hear from anybody that wants to connect, but this conversation is great. And I salute the platform that you created.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm going to make it easy for everyone. All your links are going to be in the description box below. I understand social media can be a beast sometimes. It's something that I don't find much love in. In the beginning, it's something that I had to learn and do, but now I hire people to do it. When I hire those people akin to our conversation, I make sure that they want to be here too. I don't want anyone that doesn't want to be here. If you just want a paycheck, I'm going to see it. I'm very aware of who I hire. And I thought when I first started, I was going to be like the best boss ever. I was like, I'm going to be the best boss. I'm the greatest guy ever. But then I started to see like, okay, I was doing the same thing that many of the leaders that I'm sure you're working with did. They became so one-tracked, one-minded. And we do have to work through that. I encourage everyone who's a leader, who is a person who's trying to enhance themselves, to reach out to K-Rahn and to basically elevate themselves so they can elevate everyone else around them. I want to thank you so much for coming on, spending some time with us, and talking about the work that you do.
Right on. Appreciate you. Have a great one.